We say we're trying to find our style, but what we're really trying to find is belonging. Style feels like identity, almost like proof that we are not just copying, and that as artists we are original, and that makes us feel good. Because in the world that we live in, especially online, we are taught to measure success by how recognizable our work is, how it looks, how it fits into an aesthetic, how far someone else can label it as being you. What if I told you that style does not come from rushing the process, but rather it's about learning to listen to yourself and learning to see and become who you want to be on your own? In Pompeii, I stood in front of art that survived thousands of years. It even survived a volcanic eruption. The colors, although they are faded and the details just crumbling, but the feeling is still there. And that isn't an artist who cared about looking original. These were artists who were painting not thinking about their grid or an aesthetic. They're thinking about the story that they were telling, about the wall that's in front of them, and that moment trying to capture whatever that was right there in that time. And that's what I want to offer to you today. The reminder that you don't need to look like an artist. You just need to stay with your practice long enough to become one. I'm so glad that you took that trip with me, and I really hope you enjoy just spending a little time in the afternoon at Italy. It was my first trip in Italy, and really Pompeii was such a dream to walk through because my kids had been reading so many books about the ruins, the volcanoes, and then being able to still see that the art is still standing there, and the types of paints and resources that they had back then really made me marvel about how humans just love to express with what's in front of them. Now today, I want to show you our Cosmo flowers. And this here is a muse for many of my paintings. I have gone through the Cosmo flowers and painted her in so many different ways, and I'm going to be walking you through the different styles and ways I have experimented, repeated my technique, refined it, tweaked it, depending on the stage that I was in my journey. This piece was done in 2022, and at that point in time, it was the first time I was painting from reference. I had pulled her out from the flower color guide, and I decided to just create the different florals that were side facing. Now, this was also one of the times that I was practicing painting white flowers. And then I also did one like this where I was just playing with marks and reflecting back on where I was in my journey. I was definitely rushing myself to find a destination or a style way before I was already mastering the foundations. In fact, where I was at was really at stage 2 instead of, trying to focus on the boring parts of painting, which, by the way, I have done a video where I talked and shared with you about skipping stages. That video is in the description so that you can take a look at it. But I want to bring you on a trip through all of my different variation of Cosmo flowers and how they have been transforming and moving through the stages of my own artist passage so that you get to see how progression looks like when painting the same flower as you move through your stages, just because of the skills that you have acquired and the way your eye and hand have started to evolve and change with the different paintings that you are able to do. I am so excited for you to watch this. Let's get started. Now, painting in white was probably one of those things that I was not very confident in. So this was actually a good opportunity for me to kind of try and play around with how it looked like. And then I also found compositions and books where I managed to get some beautiful ones where I saw Cosmo flowers as well. And I noticed how I was leaning towards the comfort of these flowers because they were easy to capture, especially if they are front facing, and they are really beautiful as well when they are side facing. Now let's talk about how my Cosmo flowers have evolved over time. Now this here is me going back to basics where I had actually run a retreat called Brush and Bloom, and I shared with artists how the Cosmo flower was a great one for you to just do wet and dry, just so that you understood how to make marks and create the silhouette of flowers. Now this is really stage one, and at stage one the focus isn't so much on being able to find the style at the moment, but rather to make marks with your brush, see what it can do. You know, this one was with a round brush and then this one was with a flat brush, and interestingly enough, all of these paintings that I did were with a flat brush because I found my love for flat brushes. And then after that, you know, trying out painting the Cosmo flowers where you can actually see that it is kind of fuzzy, and being able to create it such that there is, you know, nice soft effects and edges using wet in wet is also pretty fun. So this here really is a stage 2 kind of exploration where you're playing now with water and kind of getting to know the different ways in which you can create. And this whole page of Cosmo flowers here, one of the things that I really enjoyed was probably experimenting with monochrome, for example, and I actually experimented with desaturating my colors just because yellow is one of those tricky ones that it gets very strange in terms of like trying to darken it, and you can't really darken it because already it's a very light tinted kind of color. So then you need to play with saturation instead, and I did something similar here as well where I was actually playing with layers, and this was really when I started to get into stage 3. Now this is actually a brush movement class where I wanted to show my artists of different stages how it would look like for them to practice that same flower but also be able to focus on specific skills. And this here was in wet and wet, and then this one here was more in our wet and dry, and also, you know, with colors, with blends, and, you know, adding in layers, transparency, and all of that. So let's go into some of our other variations of Cosmos. Now, I also created one like this one. This is on YouTube where, again, I had used the Flower Color Guide book. And this book was such a good resource because they have got some beautiful flowers that are mostly side-facing. And one of the things I really like is just being able to have something to look at so that you don't get repeated brush marks. Now, here is the Cosmo flower, and I had put it in this entire red composition. You can find this video on YouTube. I've done the entire thing, so you will be able to see it step by step if you would like to paint with me. Now, here is another one I missed out in 2022. You see, because I wanted to go really abstract and I was again playing with white, as you can see, I started to do a lot of wet in wet. So you can see I was experimenting with my stage 2 skills, and then after that I was sprinkling in some of these flowers that were white. And it being really abstract, you can see that the composition is such that I was playing around with space, I was playing around with, you know, making marks to just represent flowers. Really, I'm not even sure that they look anything like Cosmos, but that actually inspired this piece that I did together with Aurelia. Oh yes, my child has been here. And this piece that I did live together with Aurelia during our Brush and Bloom retreat was so fun. We wanted to do different variations, and this here was all Cosmos. I actually left out white spaces. I also at this point was already around stage 3 and 4, and I already had good understanding of paint and water ratio, and I was starting to think about color, I was starting to think about space. So this here was a really fun one to do. And speaking of composition, this is also something that our stage 3 and 4 artists are able to do, where we can really just identify how to actually play around with color as well as shadows. So now you have seen so many different variations of our Cosmo flowers so far. And I think one of the ones that I had so much fun doing was also with Emma LaFay. Again, the Cosmo flowers, and you can see this is not so much on just painting in one way, but rather finding the common themes across all of these different things, because you're going to have that brush stroke or that color that keeps coming up over and over again, or even a specific direction of flower that you're good at painting. And this one was a session that I did with Emma LaFay last year. You'll be able to find that video also in the description below. Now here is one that's really fun, where I challenged my stage 4 and 5 artists to paint using a limited color palette. Now you see, before we actually get to this space where we understand how to use the limited color palette, we need to already have grasped all of our stage 1, 2, and 3 skills. The layering, the values, the brush work, the paint and water ratio. We need to get all of those skills out of the way. And this would have been covered all over here. And this is how we actually slowly think about the way we put paint to paper with more intentionality based on what we are able to do, rather than forcing ourselves to move to spaces that we have not even learned to apply. So hopefully this example has given you some things to think about. Now, this painting here, it's framed. It's in my living room space. One of my favorite and first Cosmo flower paintings. It's done in 2022. The reason why I love this one so much is because of the feeling of just letting the paint do the work. I think when I sat down and I just wet the paper and then I just dabbed green everywhere and then I just let everything bleed and play around, and I was just filling out the spaces with some white Cosmos, it really made me feel so much, because this was exactly how I wanted to paint, that experience, and that was so much more fulfilling and satisfying than chasing after a style or chasing after a specific destination. In stage 1, I start with the basics. This is just a single bloom, wet and dry, and really just letting the watercolor transparency speak for itself. I wasn't trying to make it beautiful. In fact, I was just trying to understand different things that happens to my brush when I put pressure, when I pull it in a certain way. This stage is all about observation. It's also about play, and I was learning not just how a Cosmo is shaped, but how I want to shape it. Now, when you're playing with the transparency of watercolor and you begin to see that you can layer parts of your petal over each other as they have dried, plus add in a pop of color, this really changes the way you begin to see the medium. You start to think about what else it is able to do and begin to use these different skill sets that you are observing and discovering to put it inside of your painting. Stage 2 is just also a single flower. However, what I'm starting to begin doing is setting constraints. I choose a dominant red and I pair it with just another blue tone. This is not about understanding color variety, it's about setting your color mood. And the more I repeat it and understanding which is going to be my dominant color, how am I going to be using a limited palette, the more I notice what I like. Just like how I love this red sitting next to the blue and how they mute each other at some points. And with a little bit of pop of blue, it creates even more of the red glowing in the flower. The way the two pigments mix quietly, this is not from doing things in a way where it's controlled, but rather we are allowing the paint to show us the way, and style starts to develop because of our exploration, our curiosity, and the repetition of the practice from stage 1. Now, the more I train my eye, the more I start to seek out for references. And this is where stage 3 took me into looking for details. I looked for a vase of Cosmos and I painted from a real reference. Here, I was studying light, structure, and color balance. This was no longer about guessing and thinking about where my pockets of light should be. Instead, it was about listening to what was in front of me. I also started to notice what I naturally reached for, which shapes I tend to soften, which colors I love to exaggerate. Copying wasn't really copying. In fact, it was more about reflecting. And reflecting where I was listening to myself and what I was always going for as my practice continued to develop from stage 1 and 2. Now that we have trained our eye and we have started to discover the different possibilities of watercolor, whether it is with brushwork, wet in wet, wet on dry, and also limiting our color palette, we come into stage 4 and think about how we can express ourselves. This painting is part of a guest session that I did with one of my favorite artists, Aurelia. She's got an Instagram account called Create the Cut, and she gave me permission to start thinking about how to move differently. Instead of painting the flowers, to leave spaces for the papers to shine through and use the spaces as a way to showcase flowers. To start letting the field feel a lot more wild. There was a reference, however, we start to take the time to make our own choices and decisions. Here is where something really shifted, because instead of finding my style, I started noticing where things were already showing up. In the negative space where I chose to leave, I just love being able to see white blooms appear. With the quick flicks of my brush and the looseness that I'm allowing my brush to move and lead me, here is also where I started to find signature movements that only I could make. And here is where I believe that your style has been with you from stage 1. The only thing is that we needed to gain a foundation to help us to know what exactly we could do with the tool. Because just like cooking, if you understand how exactly your spices smell and how they taste, you would know what would go together so that you can create a harmonious dish that is going to be so exciting to serve to your guests. So I hope that this entire series has given you the opportunity to begin to slow down, take out your pieces of artwork and start observing what you see, and hopefully give you more insight as to what you can do next time instead of chasing the outcome. So if you've been chasing style for a while and you're noticing some impatience that your work does not feel recognizable, I just want you to know that it takes a lot of repetition and a lot of becoming a lot more than just doing. It doesn't really show up just because you choose a specific pathway, but rather it shows up when you keep going. Showing up messy, being really consistent with just wanting to become intentional with your practice. So not just practicing in any way at all. And when you paint that same flower again and again, you're going to start noticing what you love about the shapes that you are able to replicate or the colors that you keep going back to. And sometimes, if your style is not clear yet, despite painting for a while, it's not because you're not ready. It could be that the stage that you are at is really asking for something much deeper. Maybe it's in brush control or values, or maybe even learning to enjoy practicing again. And that's kind of where the artist passage comes in. And it's exactly why I use it so much with the artists that I work with and even with my own practice. It's to show you where you are, what you need to focus on, so that we don't chase the wrong things that would end up making us feel discouraged and rushed, and to really be building something that feeds us joy and lasts for a long time. So if you haven't taken the Artist Passage quiz yet to find out what stage you are at, I would love to invite you into my Artist Passage Hub, where I provide resources for artists to help you to know exactly what skill you should be focusing on, so that you get a lot more direction and find so much more intentionality in your practice. So just to end off this video, I want you to remember that your style is not missing. In fact, it is just becoming.